When I walked in, the young nanny was arguing with my fiancé about the literary achievements of the 8 great masters of the Tang and Song dynasties. She got so worked up that she raised her hand and punched him lightly in the chest. "You're the one who's wrong." The man fell silent for 2 seconds, then let out a low laugh. I'm wrong, you're right." I stood behind them, holding the custom-made wedding invitation in my hand, suddenly at a loss. After all, this design, I really quite liked it. Chapter 1. In many people's eyes, my fiancé Luis is a remarkable man. As a child, he read through historical classics and was hailed as a prodigy. At 21, after graduating from a prestigious university, he entered the investment world. With his sharp judgment, he made a bold bet on an unpopular asset and rose to fame overnight. In the following years, as an independent investor, he succeeded again and again, multiplying his family's assets several dozen times. Now, he lives in a 280 square meter penthouse in the city center. Every day he reads, drinks tea, and occasionally makes an investment, carrying the air of someone who has chosen a hidden life within the city. Generally speaking, people like him usually have their quirks. Luis is no exception. He is emotionally detached, taciturn, fond of quiet. He has a cleanliness obsession and an extreme intolerance for stupidity. Aside from necessary business occasions, he rarely goes out. His daily life is taken care of by a nanny named Monica. Toward everyone and everything around him, he carries a faint sense of distance. But I am the only exception. Luis and I grew up together. When he was 9, his mother passed away. I accompanied him up the mountain in the middle of the night, and the 2 small children leaned against each other and slept one night in front of her grave. 4 years ago, when my father's illegitimate son suddenly appeared and tried to seize power, he planned step by step and helped me successfully take over the family company. When he underwent coronary bypass surgery, I stood alone outside the operating room, praying devoutly for him. When my company's projects were obstructed, he mobilized funds and connections to help me turn things around. In the years after both our parents passed away, we were like 2 glamorous yet solitary birds, relying on each other for warmth. So, even though in others' eyes, he is a prodigy, a great man, and I am a brainless rich beauty, our relationship is very good. We are each other's exception. Chapter 2. Not long ago, after returning from an overseas business trip, I went to see him. I found that Monica was not there. Instead, a young girl was busy around the house. She's called, Monica injured her leg, so she asked her niece to fill in for a few months. When he said this, Luis was sitting by the window, squinting thoughtfully at a partially completed chessboard. Tea was boiling beside him, white steam curling around his relaxed, serene features. He still looked as indifferent to his surroundings as ever. "Miss Selena, please call me Zoe. I'll be in your care from now on." Zoe walked over with her back straight and greeted me. I looked her over. She had delicate features, slightly thin lips, and wore a faded blue dress. When she spoke, her chin was slightly raised, her pronunciation clear, her words concise. To be honest, I didn't like her at first glance. How should I put it? She gave off a strange air of unearned composure. But it didn't matter. She was only working for a few months. Besides, Monica had treated me well before. I smiled and took out the silk scarf I'd bought abroad for Monica, handing it to her. "Hi, Zoe. This is for you. Consider it a little welcome gift." Zoe didn't reach out to take it. She gave a faint smile, her expression distant. "That wouldn't be appropriate. We're only in an employer-employee relationship. Everything should follow the contract." The little box with the scarf remained held up in midair, like some pitiful thing meant as a bribe but refused. I raised an eyebrow. "Following the contract is fine. If I remember correctly, the contract says the monthly salary of $30,000 includes a clothing allowance and requires proper, elegant attire. Do you think the dress you're wearing meets that standard?" She pressed her lips together, lifting her chin slightly. "Miss Selena and I are not from the same world, so you may not understand. I was born poor and am used to being frugal. I don't think this dress damages the employer's image. Of course, if Miss Selena insists, I will change into something you consider appropriate." Every sentence centered on I, and on that final you. She even emphasized the word I grew impatient listening and didn't bother to argue further. Turning away, I tossed out one sentence. Then change it. 2 seconds of silence followed. Then a low voice came from behind. Yes. I sat down in front of Luis's tea table. Only then did he raise his head. When he saw me, his eyes lit up and he smiled gently. Selena, you're back? I couldn't help laughing. Yes, I'm back. Did you finally come back from your little mental vacation too, old man? Chapter 3. Luis and I are getting married in 5 months. The date was set back when both our parents were still alive. We deliberately chose the penthouse where Luis currently lives as our marital home. First, because his health isn't good, and the top floor is quiet and open, which benefits both his body and mind. Second, because it's closer to my company. The apartment has been well maintained, but Luis lives simply. Many daily necessities and facilities were incomplete, so over the past half year, I often came here to make small changes. For example, hanging a few paintings, placing some green plants or small decorations, changing to brighter curtains. When I did these things, Luis would sit nearby quietly reading, playing chess, or watching the stock market. He let me do whatever I wanted. After that, for a period of time, I was busy preparing for the wedding, and at the same time a new project had just launched at my company. I was genuinely swamped, so much so that when I came back to this apartment again, I discovered it had completely changed. First of all, the door code had been changed. Luis and I share the same birthday. We deliberately used that date as the password, mainly so it would be easy for me to remember, since he rarely goes out. But this time, I was locked out. Because the password was wrong, I called Luis. He didn't answer. I knocked, but no one opened the door. 10 minutes later, Luis called back and said he'd been in a meeting in the study with his phone on silent. When he learned I was outside, he immediately came to open the door. When I walked in, Zoe came out from the utility balcony wearing gloves covered in foam. She used her elbow to brush aside the loose strands of hair on her forehead and calmly apologized to me. I'm sorry, Miss Selena. I was washing clothes on the balcony just now. The place is too big and I didn't hear you knocking. I'll pay attention next time. I asked Luis. Why was the password changed? He paused slightly. Was it changed? Before I could continue, Zoe suddenly interjected. I changed the password since the front door code was Mr. Luis's birthday. I felt it was very unsafe. Anyone with bad intentions could easily guess it and walk right in, so I changed it to a new password that's both secure and easy to remember. I did tell Mr. Luis about this. Luis turned his head and thought for a moment. It does seem like you mentioned it. Sorry, Selena. I forgot to tell you. As he spoke, he affectionately patted my head. Seeing this, Zoe turned her face toward the window, as if expressing her stance of politely avoiding looking at other people's intimacy. I felt displeased, but said nothing. I didn't expect that next I would discover many more changes around the apartment. On the balcony, the green corner I had carefully arranged, where the potted plants had originally been staggered in height and layered, now had over 10 pots placed at equal distances in a straight line along the balcony, like a welcoming aisle. Several paintings I had bought from renowned artists and casually set on cabinets were now nailed onto the wall with thick screws. Almost all the decorations had been moved, and when I walked into the master bedroom and saw that the original mint green curtains had been replaced with heavy burgundy velvet curtains, the anger rising in my chest could no longer be suppressed. I went to the living room with a dark expression. Zoe was half kneeling beside the tea table, wiping one of its legs. The loose strands of hair on her forehead swayed with her movements. She looked extremely diligent. Luis said gently, Zoe, there's no need to work so hard. This table doesn't actually need to be wiped every day. I have a cleanliness obsession. If I don't wipe it, I feel uncomfortable. Zoe looked up and smiled openly at him, then went back to work seriously. I walked over. Seeing me, Luis smiled and said, Why do you look so unhappy? Who made our Selena upset? Why were the curtains changed? I asked directly. He looked confused. Which room? Zoe stood up and spoke slowly. Luis hasn't been sleeping well these past 2 days. I thought about it and moved the curtains from the screening room to the master bedroom. They block out light better. You thought about it? I looked at her coldly. Are you the mistress of this house? Chapter 4. Zoe froze for a moment. She clearly hadn't expected me to say something like that so directly. Her face flushed, but she quickly steadied herself. Miss Selena, I was only doing what a nanny is supposed to do. If you think I've done anything wrong, you can criticize me, but please don't insult me. She lifted her chin slightly, enunciating each word, like a warrior who had been humiliated but refused to bend. Anger flared in my chest. Seeing her like this only made it worse. I said coldly, "You've been here less than 2 weeks. The door code was changed according to your wishes. The furnishings were rearranged to suit you. Even the curtains in the master bedroom were replaced because you thought about it. Are these really things a nanny is supposed to do?" Zoe bit her lip. Her voice trembled, but she still argued her case. "Everything I did was for Luis, and I informed Luis about all of it. I have a clear conscience." I felt both amused and irritated, and continued, "You know perfectly well that I'm Luis's fiancé, and that this is our marital home. Anyone with even a basic sense of propriety would at least inform me before doing these things. That's not making things difficult, that's simple common sense. Yet you keep mentioning only Luis. Are you trying to remind me that whatever you do has nothing to do with me?" After years in business, I had gradually learned to manage my emotions and rarely lost my temper anymore. I didn't know why, but today I couldn't control it at all. I was burning with irritation and said impatiently, "That's enough. Pack your things. You're leaving today." Zoe was stunned, staring at me in shock. She didn't speak for a long moment, biting her lower lip tightly. Tears as large as beans began to fall one by one. Luis frowned slightly. "Selena, did something upset you outside today?" I was on the phone asking my assistant to arrange for someone to come change the curtains. Hearing this, I glanced at him, puzzled. "Can't you tell what I'm angry about? Go out for a moment. I need to talk to Miss Selena." He said this to Zoe, who was standing there in a daze. After a few seconds, Zoe, red-eyed, hurried out. I hung up the phone and looked at Luis expressionlessly. "What? Do I not even have the right to dismiss a nanny in my own house?" He smiled helplessly and shook his head. "Of course you do. Forget dismissing her. If you wanted to kick me out, that would be fine too. But Zoe is a bit special. When Monica asked me to help, she specifically told me about her situation." He poured me a cup of black tea and spoke gently. "Zoe's parents died in a car accident when she was in high school. They never found the person responsible, and there was no compensation. It said she was top of her class, but she dropped out to take care of her younger siblings. Now that they're in college, she's working everywhere to earn their tuition. Monica introduced her this time out of sympathy, to give her a chance to make some money. What happened today is partly my fault too. When Monica was here, I was used to not worrying about anything. Zoe probably just wanted to do well and ended up offending you. Selena, for my sake, be tolerant this once. She won't be here for more than a few months anyway." I said nothing. It wasn't that I felt sorry for Zoe. Since taking over the company, I'd realized that being a boss didn't mean being as amiable as possible, and it certainly didn't mean letting sympathy run unchecked. Kindness is kindness, work is work, but I knew Luis well. Deep down, he had a touch of condescension mixed with compassion. At business events, he was often cool toward bosses trying to curry favor, but toward servers and cleaning staff, he was always gentle and polite, thanking them at every turn. There was no need to let a temporary nanny affect my relationship with him. "Fine," I nodded, then pouted. "But just this once, Luis. From now on, you're not allowed to take other people's side instead of mine." Luis laughed. "Selena, of course, no matter what, I will always be on your side." Chapter 5. This incident ended with Zoe apologizing to me, her eyes red. It was obvious she still felt humiliated and wronged, but that didn't matter. I was very busy. I had no time to care about her emotions or attitude, nor did I need her heartfelt submission. You get paid to do the job. If you're paid well, you should do it well. After that outburst from me, for quite some time afterward, she didn't do anything on her own initiative again. When I went to the apartment, she would greet me with a fixed, procedural smile, then consciously disappear from my sight. If I didn't leave, she wouldn't appear. As I looked around the apartment, it was indeed tidier and cleaner than when Monica was there. Luis had put on some weight too. He said Zoe was the kind who liked to research things, and recently she had been studying all kinds of recipes. Her cooking was quite good. One day, I noticed a desk had been placed in one corner of the utility balcony, with several stacks of books arranged neatly on top: literature, history, and finance. Just as I was feeling surprised, Zoe's tense voice came from behind me. "My hobby is reading, but I only read at night after Luis has rested. It absolutely doesn't affect my work during the day." Holding on to ideals despite humble circumstances was, after all, a quality worth acknowledging. I didn't say anything. Zoe had a strong personality. She said it didn't affect her work, and I believed her. I wasn't that unreasonable, but I didn't expect that because of this hobby of hers, something subtle and hard to define began to change between Luis and Zoe. Once, I noticed several literature books placed beside Luis's tea table. I casually picked one up and saw it was filled with underlines and notes. Out of curiosity, I asked him. He explained indifferently. "They're Zoe's. She sometimes asks me questions about literature. She probably set them here and forgot." Then he seemed to remember something and added with a chuckle, "You don't know. On her first day here, her suitcase was full of books except for a few clothes." I didn't expect someone from her background to still insist on studying. Not long after, I brought the wedding designer to the apartment to discuss wedding details with Luis. Since we were having a traditional Chinese wedding, the opening included a few lines of poetry. When Zoe came over to serve tea, the designer was reading one of the lines aloud. She suddenly smiled, and at the same time, Luis curved his lips too. The two of them seemed, in that instant, to be sharing some secret. The designer paused and asked nervously, "Luis, did I read it wrong?" Luis waved his hand and said with a smile, "It has nothing to do with you. I just told someone a joke related to that line of poetry last night. It's just a coincidence." Last week, my company held a groundbreaking ceremony. Luis attended the ribbon cutting with me as one of the shareholders. He rarely went out and never paid much attention to what he wore, so I deliberately went to the apartment first and carefully picked out a suit for him. When we were leaving, Zoe was busy in the living room. He naturally turned his head and asked her, "How is this one?" Zoe nodded just as naturally and replied, "It's okay." In the car, I looked at Luis. He touched his face in confusion. "What's wrong with me?" I tilted my head and suddenly asked, "Do you like Zoe?" He froze for a moment, then flicked my forehead with his finger. "What nonsense are you thinking about again?" I kept looking at him. "Then why, when I chose your clothes for you, did you ask a nanny whether they looked good? If she had said they didn't, were you planning to change?" He laughed. "I haven't gone out in a long time. I just asked one more person's opinion." "Selena, what's wrong with you? Then why didn't you ever ask Monica before?" The moment I asked that, I felt a little contempt for myself. Irritated, I added, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't ask." He leaned his face closer with a smile. "A young lady like you wouldn't be jealous of a nanny, would you?" I was silent for 2 seconds, then turned to look at him. "If someone like me is actually jealous of a nanny, wouldn't that be because of your problem?" He paused, then shook his head helplessly. "Selena, asking something this absurd is not only underestimating me, it's also underestimating yourself." I didn't say anything more. I was indeed someone who was used to speaking things out when there was a problem. But this matter, even I felt it was a little embarrassing. Probably just pre-wedding jitters, I told myself. Chapter 6. 1 week later, the final draft of the wedding invitations was ready. I liked the design very much. On the way to the company, I decided on a whim to stop by and show it to Luis first. As soon as I walked in, I heard arguing voices coming from the balcony. The two of them were sitting side by side in rocking chairs, facing blue sky and white clouds. The scene was warm and leisurely. Zoe was speaking in a light, lively voice. "I don't agree with your view. Han Yu and Liu Zongyuan launched the classical prose movement, and they contributed the most. Without a beginning, how could there be all the flourishing that came later? Isn't that right?" Her tone was confident. Clearly, the person she was talking to had given her enough ease and security that she wasn't afraid of offending him. I even heard something I had never noticed in her voice before, a hint of playfulness. Luis's voice answered gently. "In terms of literary achievement, Ouyang and Sushar are the true peaks. If you judge heroes only by who started it, your logic is a bit shallow. Before he could finish, Zoe suddenly reached out and punched him lightly in the chest. Luis, you're the one who's wrong. I narrowed my eyes. Luis, with his back to me, was silent for 2 seconds, then let out a low laugh. I'm wrong, you're right. Those last 2 words were spoken with extreme tenderness. The two of them suddenly stopped talking, falling into an inexplicable silence. Bang! I casually tossed my Hermes bag onto the coffee table. The sound made both of them turn around at the same time. I walked over unhurriedly, sat down on the sofa, and smiled at them. I didn't interrupt your poetic discussion, did I? Zoe jumped to her feet, smoothed her hair, and that familiar procedural smile appeared again. Miss Selena, you're joking. How would I be qualified to discuss poetry and literature with Luis? Please sit. I'll pour you some tea. She went over to the tea table. Steam curled up from the kettle. On the table, 2 underglazed red porcelain cups sat facing each other. Clearly, someone had just been sitting there drinking together. So if it wasn't poetry and literature, was it flirting and joking around? My tone cooled. Ah. Zoe burned her hand. Jerking it back, she accidentally swept the 2 teacups off the table. They hit the floor with a crisp sound and shattered into pieces. Selena, your joke startled her. Luis spoke as he slowly stood up. He casually glanced at Zoe's reddened hand, then smiled at me. What's wrong today? Did something upset you at work? Tell me and see if I can help. 15,000. I said lazily, my eyes on the broken porcelain on the floor. He smiled. What? Those cups were custom made by a master craftsman for our wedding ceremony. For the ritual of drinking the ceremonial wine together, they cost 150,000. They were a pair of Longyao glazed unity cups, symbolizing eternal union and a perfect match. They should have been sealed and stored in the side cabinet. Luis never touches those things. So, you were the one who unpacked them and took them out? I lifted my gaze to Zoe. Her face went faintly pale, but she quickly composed herself. She bit her lip and said loudly, I took them out, but I didn't mean to. I saw Luis using the same cup every day and just wanted to change it for him. I thought all the cups in the cabinet were his backups. If I had known they were something you bought for the wedding, I absolutely wouldn't have touched them. And just now, breaking them was an accident. Compensate. I cut her off. Zoe took a second to react. Her eyes flew wide open. Chapter 7. Selena. Let's not make things difficult. In the frozen atmosphere, Luis's gentle voice rang out. Zoe only broke them by accident while pouring tea for you. Besides, 150,000 to you is just the price of a bracelet. But to someone else, it could be a lifetime of savings. Let's just end this here. After he said this, Zoe's eyes instantly reddened. Her lips pressed into a firm line. Looking wrong yet stubborn, I looked at the painting hanging on the wall. It was one of the paintings that had originally been placed on a cabinet and later nailed to the wall by Zoe. It depicted a lush green mountain, with 2 tiny figures in the lower corner, holding hands as they walked upward. Back then, we were each other's absolute support, no matter what we were facing. A fine, dense ache spread through my heart. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. When I raised my eyes, I saw Luis looking at Zoe. His thin lips were pressed lightly together, and in his eyes were traces of reluctance and tenderness. Zoe knew he was looking at her. Her gaze shifted, though her eyes were red. She looked straight at me. This was a silent confrontation between women. I suddenly calmed down and spoke slowly. My voice was cool, but clear. Pouring tea is her job. It's not for me. A nanny's basic professional standard is not to touch the owner's belongings at will. She not only touched them, she broke them. And this wasn't the first time. It happened many times. How much I spend on bracelets is my choice. Damaging property means paying its price. This is a matter of right and wrong, not wealth and poverty. As for whether she has the money to pay, why should I consider that? Before she touched these things, did she consider the consequences of her actions? I spoke sentence by sentence, and surprise gradually appeared on Luis's face. Yes, in his mind, I was still that Selena who didn't understand anything and only acted on her own wishes, only saying yes or no, never explaining or arguing. At this moment, my methodical breakdown and rebuttal clearly caught him off guard. The large apartment fell silent. "I'll pay." Zoe suddenly spoke loudly. Luis came back to himself and said softly, "Where would you get the money to pay?" Zoe glanced at Luis, then straightened her back and walked into the room. She quickly came out holding a card. She walked up to me and spoke slowly. "There is exactly 100,000 in this card. It's the dowry money I've saved with my own hands over the years. The remaining amount can be deducted from my salary. Miss Selena, although I'm poor, uneducated, and low status, my dignity is equal to yours. I also don't like taking advantage of others. Since you want me to pay, then I will pay." She delivered these words with cadence and force. Luis was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "All right, since you can say that, and since Miss Selena is not someone who confuses right and wrong, then from now on, work hard. Don't worry. Money can always be earned again." With reddened eyes, Zoe bit her lip and held out the card to me. I didn't take it. Humiliation immediately appeared on her face. She briskly placed the card on the coffee table. "Miss Selena, are you satisfied now?" I said calmly. "You can leave now." Zoe took a deep breath and turned toward the kitchen. I continued, "When you go, remember to pack all of your books. Don't leave a single one behind. Just seeing them annoys me." Zoe stopped, turned around, and looked at me in shock and confusion. "Miss Selena, what do you mean?" "Selena, what do you mean?" The two of them spoke almost in unison. I leaned back against the sofa in a relaxed posture. "It means you're fired. If you damage things, you compensate. If you do something wrong, you bear the consequences. I'll waive the remaining 50,000. By calculation, you're still gaining." Zoe stood there frozen, her face frighteningly pale. "Selena." Luis's always calm brows furrowed. He spoke in a low voice. "Know when to stop." She admitted her mistake and paid the money. Why push things to the extreme? If you dismiss her, where can she find another job that pays this well? Luis. I tilted my head, looking at him with an indifferent expression. His gaze was heavy, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't continue. After calling his name, I stopped. I just looked at him. A slight flicker passed through his eyes. Something changed in his gaze. Luis was, of course, a smart man. His indifference to daily trivialities wasn't because he was foolish, but because he felt they wasted time and energy. At this moment, he keenly sensed my emotion, an emotion he had never seen from me before. "Luis, do you think I'm wrong to do this?" I asked softly. He looked at me. After a few seconds, he smiled gently. "Selena, there's nothing wrong. You're my fiancé. Of course you can do this." Zoe suddenly turned her head. She looked at him in disbelief, disappointment and hurt spreading across her face. Luis lowered his eyes. Chapter 8. When Zoe dragged her suitcase out, there was a trace of humiliation on her face. When she reached the door, she glanced at Luis one last time. Luis was sitting at the tea table pouring tea. Steam rose and blurred his features. She smiled faintly, lifted her chin, opened the door, and left. I called my assistant and told her to arrange for a new nanny. No problem. With such a high salary, so many professionals would fight for it. I even want to try myself. I said irritably. Are you implying your current salary is too high? That's different. Luis's place is so easy to work at. If I could, I'd take both jobs. My assistant used to be the front desk at the company. When I parachuted into the firm and was sidelined, with no one I could rely on, I promoted her to assistant. These past few years, the two of us, two young women, had encouraged each other, taken the blame for each other, and pushed through hurdle after hurdle. On the surface we were superior and subordinate, but privately we had long become true friends. I hung up amid her joking voice. When I turned around, I saw Luis looking at me with a smile. "Selena, it's working hours. How come you have time to come over today? Did you miss me?" His smile was as gentle as ever, as if nothing had happened just now. I looked at the corner of the red invitation peeking out of my bag and fell silent for 2 seconds. "It's nothing. I just happened to stop by to see you." And just like that, the matter seemed to pass. The new nanny was hired quickly. Among 3 candidates, I chose the youngest one, Because when she stood up, she naturally pushed the chair back into place. After she came, she performed very well. Her clothing was appropriate. She worked according to rules, and she spoke with proper measure. Her sense of self and her professional boundaries were just right. My relationship with Luis seemed to return to normal. He still spent his days in that large apartment reading and drinking tea, living a leisurely and quiet life, like a cultivator withdrawn from the world. And I busied myself every day with company affairs. Occasionally, I went to the apartment to see him, until one day, I went to the office of our partner, Hudson. As I passed a conference room, I unexpectedly saw a familiar figure, Zoe. She was wearing a black business suit, directing several employees as they arranged the room. Our eyes met. A flicker of panic crossed her face. Then she calmly turned away to speak to others, as if she hadn't recognized me at all. What a coincidence, my assistant muttered beside me, thinking how small the world was. Hudson smiled and said, "When Luis recommended Zoe, he said she was your relative. She's already been working here almost a month." I stopped. Luis? Yes, Luis said her previous salary was $30,000, so it should be at least that much. I thought I couldn't wrong your relative, so I arranged for her to be office director. I fell silent. The next day, Luis and I attended a business dinner for a shareholder company together. In the car, Luis lowered his head and carefully helped me straighten the hem of my evening gown. I casually asked, "Was it you who arranged for Zoe to work at Hudson's?" His hand paused, then he lifted his head and smiled at me helplessly. "When did you become so diligent, even personally visiting client companies?" "I didn't tell you about this because I was afraid you'd be petty. It's like this. Some time ago I talked to Monica. She said Zoe's financial situation has been very difficult since she left. I felt I should still help her. Speaking of which, Selena, why is it that you two just can't get along? But if it makes you unhappy, then don't go to Hudson's company. Out of sight, out of mind." I couldn't help laughing. Why should I get along with her? Hudson is my partner. Why should I avoid them because of her? Luis frowned and was silent for 2 seconds, then said in a troubled tone, "Mainly, Zoe's personality is stronger than most people's. If I tell her to avoid you, she might feel sneaky and hurt in her pride. You don't need to worry anymore," I said. His eyes lit up. "So you're willing to make concessions? Selena, I find you really impressive now, much more mature," I said calmly. "Because I already told Hudson to fire her." Chapter 9. Luis's expression stiffened inch by inch. A few seconds later, he suddenly spoke, his voice thick with anger. "Why? Zoe is just a woman at the bottom, struggling to rise up. She came to work as a nanny, and I helped her find a job. What's so wrong about that? Why do you keep targeting her again and again? Selena, I never thought you'd still be this willful, this lacking in empathy. When are you going to truly grow up?" From childhood to now, I had rarely seen Luis angry. He used to say that anger was the mark of incompetence. He used to say that one should never speak to the extreme, that the wise are sparing with words. But now, he was firing off accusation after accusation, the anger clearly churning in his eyes. He had become someone I didn't recognize. For the first time, I suddenly felt bored facing him. She can struggle upward. She can have pride and self-respect, but she can't claim self-respect while quietly hovering at my side, trading on my goodwill and using my connections. If she were just an ordinary nanny, whether you helped her or I did wouldn't matter. But Zoe is different. Why? Luis's voice pressed down on his anger. "Because you crossed a line." I stared at him coldly. Perhaps he had never seen such a look in my eyes. Luis suddenly opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The car fell into absolute silence. The driver and my assistant were sitting in front, both stiff-backed, not daring to make a sound. In the frozen atmosphere, Luis's phone suddenly rang. He instinctively answered. We both saw the caller ID, Zoe. He held the phone in midair, hesitating, but faintly. The sound of a woman sobbing came through. He pressed his lips together slightly and glanced at me, as if to prove something, then raised the phone to his ear. "Zoe, don't panic. Whatever it is, talk slowly." My assistant let out a soft snort from the front seat. I turned my face toward the window. Zoe was speaking on the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. It was clearly through sobs. Luis listened intently without speaking. His face grew darker by the second. After he hung up, he said 2 words. Pull over. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Pull over, I said. The car slowly edged to the side. Luis seemed unaware of any of this, staring ahead as he spoke heavily. Zoe has a kind of toughness in her bones. She's been hung up on the 50,000 you waved that day. She said she didn't want to take advantage of anyone. So even while working at Hudson's, she's been delivering food on weekends, and you had Hudson fire her, cutting off her livelihood. She didn't even plan to tell me. She was bearing it alone, saying that at worst she'd just deliver food full-time and eventually pay back what she owed you. Just now, she fell on the road and broke her leg. Selena, while you wear expensive jewelry and attend lavish banquets in luxury gowns, because of your displeasure, a poor woman struggling at the bottom is lying helplessly in a hospital crying. My future wife should be someone kind and beautiful. Someone who sees the suffering of the world and respects those at the bottom, not a spoiled rich girl who uses her power to bully others. Selena, before the wedding, I hope you seriously reflect on your behavior. For now, don't contact me. Without waiting for me to speak, he yanked open the door and strode out. The car returned to silence. My assistant turned to look at me. TSK, you didn't tell him the wedding's already cancelled? I rolled my eyes faintly. I was going to tell him after tonight's banquet. My assistant leaned back with a long sigh. Let him keep acting like that. The driver got out grim-faced and came around, muttering, if he's going, fine, but why not close the door while he's at it? Chapter 10. After that night, Luis and I didn't contact each other for a month. During that time, I called him twice, wanting to make the cancellation of the wedding clear, but he hung up quickly both times, so I stopped calling. My assistant came to me in a huff. Let's go to his place and tell him face to face. I lifted my head from a pile of documents, speechless. You're more anxious than the person involved. The top priority now is finalizing next week's Ching project. Hundreds of people in the company have been busy for half a year waiting for it to launch and get their bonuses. Everything else comes after. My assistant tilted her head, staring at me with big round eyes, not speaking for a long time. If you have something to report, speak. If not, you're dismissed. Miss Selena, she suddenly said. You've changed a lot since the first time I met you 4 years ago. I raised an eyebrow. How so? Back then, at the company, you were either losing your temper or sulking every day. Sometimes you hid and cried, but in front of others you forced yourself to look like an aloof rich girl. And now? She thought seriously. Now everyone thinks the head of the group should be exactly like you. We all feel secure following you. Selena, you're a real strong woman in my heart. My eyes stung suddenly. I lowered my gaze for a long time and said softly, When Luis teased me, he liked to call me Boss Selena. In the past, that was true, but over these past few years, with my parents' successive deaths, the dangerous struggle for inheritance against my illegitimate half-brother, and slowly learning to run a company on my own, I had long since changed. What hadn't changed was Luis. He stayed in his small enclosed world, using weariness of intrigue and the pursuit of fame and profit as an excuse to live as a kind of hermit. He could do that. I couldn't. I had to protect the company my mother left behind. It was the livelihood of hundreds of people and hundreds of families behind them. I forced myself to grow. Once, I thought Luis would be my family, my lover, for life. So when the doctor, with a complicated expression, told me that because of his heart condition Luis might not be able to function sexually, I almost without hesitation said, it's fine, as long as he's healthy. But now, life had taught me to cut off decisively. When Luis chose again and again to stand on the opposite side from me, he and I drifted farther and farther apart. Chapter 11. In fact, I could accept Luis's emotional wavering. People change. Even if we couldn't be lovers, we could still be friends, partners. But the moment I saw Luis and Zoe walk in side by side at the Ching project negotiation meeting, I truly understood what it meant for a familiar heart to change beyond recognition. Only 1 month had passed, yet Zoe looked like a completely different person. She was wearing the latest Chanel suit, one hand holding a cane, the other resting lightly on Luis's arm. Luis's gaze skimmed over me indifferently as he helped Zoe sit down across from me. The chairman of Ching Ching was very young, a second-generation successor. He smiled and said, "Miss Selena, I admire the effort your company has invested in this project recently, but we are all business people. Business is business. I can't refuse the profit concessions Luis has offered. So I'm sorry, our company has decided to choose General Manager Zoe as our project partner." I asked, "General Manager Zoe?" Across from me, Zoe smiled slowly. "Miss Selena, long time no see. I am now the general manager hired by Luis's company. Clothes and power truly are the best cosmetic surgery." At this moment, Zoe looked radiant, full of confidence, her entire being bathed in a sense of triumph rising from within. And beside her, Luis watched me in silence. At that project meeting, I didn't say another word. When I was leaving, Luis stopped me. "Zoe is crippled." I looked at him. "So? What does that have to do with me?" A trace of disappointment flashed through his eyes. His voice was extremely heavy and slow. "I didn't expect you to still have this kind of attitude. Selena, what I did today was to make you realize that this world doesn't revolve around your will. If I can support you, I can support others too. People are equal. You are only luckier than most. Born with good parents and a good background. If before the wedding you had taken the initiative to compensate Zoe, don't worry, the project could have been a joint cooperation between both companies. It wouldn't have caused you much loss. I hoped you would." I cut him off impatiently. "The wedding is cancelled." He froze. "What?" My assistant had been holding it in for a long time. Now she finally couldn't restrain herself. "Luis, are you hard of hearing? Selena said the wedding is cancelled. It was cancelled long before you went to the hospital playing the hero. The 2 times Selena called you were to tell you exactly this. And another thing, do you really think you're some great contributor and major shareholder? The projects you invested in were unprofitable from the very beginning. Miss Selena kept the company running all these years just so she could continue paying you dividends." Luis had been praised and indulged since childhood. No one had ever spoken to him in this tone. His face flushed with anger as he shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about? Since when is it your place, a mere assistant, to interfere in matters between Selena and me?" My face darkened. "Luis, what right do you have to speak to her like that? Apologize to her." Chapter 12. Luis looked as if he couldn't believe his ears. He turned to stare at me. "Selena, what are you saying? You want me to apologize to her? Didn't you hear how she spoke to me?" I replied coldly. "She wasn't wrong. The wedding was cancelled long ago. You were the one who refused to answer your phone. So I couldn't inform you. As for the company we invested in together, it has already begun liquidation and deregistration procedures." He froze for 2 seconds, disbelief spreading across his face. "Selena, you cancelled our wedding just because I helped Zoe? Are our wedding plans really that unimportant to you?" My voice was flat, as if I were stating something utterly ordinary. "When you chose, again and again, to stand on someone else's side, there was already no possibility left between us. My future husband must support me from beginning to end, defend me without conditions. And clearly, you are not that person. But I still didn't expect you to go this far. You and those people who raised their hands one by one at the shareholders' meeting to vote me out of the board, what's the difference?" It was as if something struck him. Luis's face suddenly drained of color, his body swaying slightly. Zoe threw away her cane and stumbled forward to support him. His chest heaved. He said hoarsely, "Selena, I'm not what you think. This project, I only. He couldn't finish. The facts were right there. Perhaps his original intention had only been to warn me, but in reality, he had indeed stood against me. I looked at him and continued. "The project hasn't been signed. There is no conclusion yet. Do you really think business cooperation today can be secured just by offering concessions? You've been clinging to your so-called spiritual world for too long. You've long since lost the market perspective and judgment required of an investor. Haven't you noticed that every one of your investments these past few years has ended in total loss? Luis, you should have stepped out of your outdated victories long ago." As I spoke, Luis watched me without saying a word. After a long while, a look of pain suddenly surfaced on his face. He asked blankly, "Selena, you really cancelled the wedding? You're lying to me, aren't you?" I turned my gaze away and stopped looking at him. My assistant shouted beside me. Yes. Yes. It's cancelled. Cancelled. Did you hear clearly? Cancelled. Zoe, seeing Luis like that, turned and glared at me. Selena, do you really think you're that impressive? You were just born lucky. If someone else had the same luck, they could do even better than you. Today, having your project taken away is only the beginning. In the future, I will defeat you step by step. I laughed. Someone else? You mean yourself, right? Then I'm truly looking forward to it. I'll be waiting to see how you defeat me. As I left, I heard Luis call out hoarsely behind me. Selena. I didn't turn back. Chapter 13. That same night, I flew to the United States. I met with the old chairman of Chingching in person and explained the situation. Our group and Chingching Group had already established deep cooperation across many fields over the past few years. Luis's concessions on a single project were far from enough to shake the overall partnership. The day after I returned from the U.S., the young chairman of Chingching personally came to our company with his team to sign the contract. He expressed his apologies to me sincerely. I just took over. My father told me to learn well from you. I hope you won't take offense at my rash decision this time. I smiled and said, it's fine. I went through the same bumps when I started. Good things take time. I hope our two companies' future cooperation goes smoothly. When he left, he added, actually, Luis also took the initiative to propose canceling the cooperation. He even paid a large penalty for breaching the preliminary agreement. I nodded. I know. Luis sent me a message, several thousand words, densely written, explaining his entire mental journey. He said his involvement with Zoe was purely out of help, absolutely nothing more. As for the Chingching project, he said that seeing a perfectly fine young woman become crippled had stirred his sense of justice. He wanted to use this setback before the wedding to correct my so-called flaw of abusing power, so it would benefit my future growth. I only read halfway before stopping. His words, like the man himself, were outdated to me. Chapter 14. Luis had always been proud since childhood. He wasn't the kind of man who would turn back and chase after someone like in novels. For him, sending such a long message explaining himself was already the lowest point his pride would allow. After I simply replied with a single word, oh, he understood my attitude very clearly. My assistant volunteered to take people to the apartment to move out all the things related to me. Luis is about to become immortal, she said with a frown. He's lost so much weight. He looks like some ascetic sage now. When he walks around that apartment, he's as thin as a sheet of paper. I looked at the mountain of documents on my desk and sighed softly. Life always changes suddenly at some point. No one is immune. He's very smart, he just can't accept failure. It's not because of me. Later, I reflected on my relationship with Luis. It had never been as passionate or intense as other people's romances. We shared the same birthday. Everyone said it was fate. We grew up together. Our parents had arranged an engagement early on, so naturally, we assumed we would end up married. First he was like a brother, then he would become a husband. Either way, the closest person in my life. That was how I saw it. I thought Luis saw it the same way. So when I decided to cancel the wedding, it wasn't as painful or agonizing as people might imagine. Of course, there was regret. Of course, there was sadness. But it was still all right. Even if we couldn't be lovers, we could still be family, friends, partners. Luis, of course, would struggle, but he only needed to endure the growing pains of change, just like I had when I first took over the company. One day, the wedding designer suddenly called me. Luis paid to restart the wedding process. I froze. With whom? Of course with you. This time he personally approved every detail, big and small. He even sent revision messages at midnight. That day, when we were designing the invitations, I mentioned there was a version you were especially satisfied with, so satisfied you said you were going to show it to him immediately. He asked which day that was. When I told him, he suddenly stopped talking. Not long after, my assistant told me the company had caught a corporate spy, an old employee who had worked there for over 10 years. I was puzzled and had him brought in for questioning. He swore to heaven that he had never sold company information. It was purely because of Luis. Luis gave me a sum of money and asked me to tell him everything about you after you entered the company, your happy moments, your unhappy ones, your successes, your failures. Every detail. Some things I couldn't remember clearly, so I went to retrieve some documents and make copies. I never thought it would be misunderstood. My assistant and I exchanged looks. We didn't understand what Luis was trying to do, until Zoe suddenly came to see me. I originally had no intention of meeting her, but the receptionist sent me a photo. Zoe was standing straight-backed at the entrance of the company. She had stood there all day. I let her in. She was still wearing the Chanel outfit from the Ching Ching project meeting. Her posture was proud. "You need to go see Luis." I no longer felt any anger toward her. After all, everything between us had only happened because of Luis. And now that I had let go of Luis, she stirred no emotion in me at all. "You came just to say that?" "Yes." "Then you can leave. If you keep standing outside my company, I'll call security." "Selena!" Her face twisted instantly, filled with anger, grievance, and unwillingness. "How can you be so heartless to Luis? Do you know what he's become?" Canceling the wedding hit him far harder than he shows. I went to see him. He angrily accused me, said Selena had already fired me and that I was no longer allowed to appear in that apartment. When I was about to leave, he started begging me instead, begging me to come explain things to you, to apologize to you. Can you imagine that? Luis, lowering himself to beg me. She fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had softened. "I've always been proud. All these years of struggling, I often imagine someone omnipotent coming to rescue me from that hopeless, stifling, endless life. Luis was that person to me. I knew he didn't belong to me, but I thought, what if? Miss Selena, are you satisfied now? I've shown you my ugliest, darkest side. Will you go see him now?" Zoe left with her head held high, just like the first time we met, when she lifted her chin and introduced herself to me. Chapter 15. When I stepped back into that apartment, Luis was sitting by the window drinking tea. He truly looked as my assistant had described, as thin as a sheet of paper. He turned his head, saw me, and smiled gently. "Selena, you're here." I nodded and sat down across from him. He placed a teacup in front of me. I was slightly surprised. He said softly, "Actually, the moment Zoe opened those cups, I knew they were for the wedding, but at the time, I thought it didn't matter. Now I went specially to have a master reproduce them. They're the same as the Langyao Unity cups." I fell silent. "You don't need to feel any pressure. I did all this just to make up, one by one, for the roles I failed to fulfill, whether you accept it or not. I only want to make myself feel a little better." I looked around. The plants, the paintings, the decorations, everything had been restored to how it was before. "I actually know that you never clearly separated the roles of family and lover in your heart. Maybe you thought I was the same, but I wasn't. Selena, I love you." Luis's voice was very soft, almost unreal in the curling steam. "I'll never forget waking up after heart surgery and seeing you first. You were crying so hard your eyes were swollen, your hair wet and stuck to your face, like a pitiful little thing." My heart hurt in waves. But I also felt unbearably happy. I thought the world was so noisy. If only it were just the two of us. But my body couldn't function. I couldn't be intimate with you, so I forced myself to become emotionally distant, detached. I wanted you to think relationships were supposed to be like that too, that they didn't need passion or closeness. That calm companionship was best, because I couldn't give you more. I know that was selfish, so subconsciously. In our relationship, I molded myself into a savior. I helped you reclaim your inheritance. I helped you stand firm in the company. I was teaching that willful little girl how to grow up, as if only that way could I keep you by my side with a clear conscience. With Zoe, I was shocked to discover another side of you. You were articulate, clear-minded, with your own views, daring to defend your position. That stirred a kind of panic deep inside me. I helped Zoe partly because I pitied her, but more importantly, subconsciously, I wanted to teach you a lesson, to suppress you, to prove you were wrong, to prove you were still the girl who needed me to grow. How could you suddenly not need me anymore? Selena, these days I traced your steps over the past few years little by little, and only then realized how remarkable you truly are. I regret that because of my body and my narrow heart. I didn't walk beside you through those joys and sorrows. I also finally understood why you value that little assistance so much. You two were real comrades who fought side by side. I truly owe her an apology. Selena. I've thought it through. You're only 28. You deserve your own happy life. Go experience normal, bright love. I won't hold you back anymore. He stood and drifted over, then wrapped his arms around me. My eyes filled instantly. This was the first time we had ever embraced. Chapter 16. Later on. I spent a long stretch of time busy with the implementation of the Ching project, only occasionally speaking with Luis on the phone. His tone over the phone was gentle, his mood bright, just like he used to be. I had said it before, even if we weren't lovers, he was still the person closest to me. I thought this kind of relationship was good. 2. A year later, I successfully entered into a marriage alliance. The other party was the only son of a conglomerate. He was cheerful, loved outdoor sports, and often early in the morning he would knock on my door so loudly it shook the walls, then hook an arm around mine and lean against the doorframe, grinning. Girl, the bright days are short, let's go on an outing. Dating him. I literally got several shades darker. My assistant laughed at me, saying I'd finally tasted the bitterness of love. I said, wasn't this a marriage alliance? She shot back, why can't a marriage alliance also have love? When my marriage alliance partner heard about it, he came to me in a huff. Selena, don't tell me when you talk about me, you still call me the marriage alliance partner? I felt a little embarrassed. Not to that extent. Not to that extent. He stared at me, eyes shining. Then tell me, what's my name? I tugged at the corner of my mouth. Ryan, did you all hear that? I blinked and looked around. Hear what? Who heard that? On my wedding day, Luis didn't come. On the phone, his voice was calm. He said he wasn't feeling well today and wished me a happy marriage. That night, around midnight, I suddenly got a call from the hospital saying Luis had suffered a heart attack and was being resuscitated. I was listed as his emergency contact. I struggled to pry Ryan's arms and legs off me, and tears spilled out all at once. Ryan jumped up immediately and drove me to the hospital. When I arrived, I saw Zoe there too. She stood outside the emergency room with a vacant stare, silent. I asked what happened. She didn't answer. 2 hours later, Luis was wheeled out, unconscious, at his bedside. Zoe and I sat silently. She suddenly spoke, eyes hollow. There have been 2 highlights in my life. One was when I ranked first in the whole school in high school. The other was being a general manager for 17 days, after Luis decided to withdraw from the project. My dream shattered. He gave me a sum of money as compensation. These past 2 years, I used that money to start a business. I thought, I'm not dumber than anyone, not lazier than anyone. The only thing I lacked was a family to back me up. Now that I had money, I could finally stand on the same starting line. Finally change my fate. But why? Why didn't things go the way I imagined? I fought and failed. Failed and fought. I could save 100,000 just working as an ordinary nanny. So why is it that now not only did I lose all my money, I'm also in debt by more than 4 million? Yesterday, the debt collectors called nonstop until I had no choice. So I went to that apartment to find Luis. I wanted to borrow another sum from him. I told myself, Zoe is not someone who gives up easily. I knocked. No one answered. So I tried the old birthday password. The door opened. Luis was home alone, drinking. I walked up to him and forced myself to say what I needed. He looked at me drunkenly and suddenly said, Selena, actually, I'm the same as other men. He said so much. It was the first time I'd heard a man lay bare his heart and emotions so completely. He talked about his helplessness, his darkness, and his desire. All of it was for you. I listened in silence. At first, I was jealous of you. I hated you. Later, I just felt sorry for him. So I said I loved him too, and I ran from the wedding venue to find him. He looked at me in a daze, stood up to hug me, and I hugged him too. He trembled and said that what other men could do, he could do too. Zoe suddenly covered her face with her hands and began to sob softly. I swear I had no other motive. Yes, I went to borrow money, but in that moment, I truly only wanted to love him properly. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect that halfway through he suddenly had an attack. While I was frantically dressing him, he suddenly stared straight at me and said, "Why is it you? Why is it you?" I never meant to hurt him. Zoe broke down, unable to stop crying. I closed my eyes. At dawn, Luis suddenly opened his eyes. He smiled at me, gently said one sentence, "Selena, our wedding is so beautiful." Then, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. His heart stopped beating. Extra. My assistant went abroad. I sponsored her to study business administration overseas, and during her studies, her salary would still be paid as usual. When she heard the news, she rushed over, hugged me and tried to kiss me. Ryan grabbed her by the back of the collar and yanked her away, calm as ever. Even women are not allowed. Back then, my brother tried to bribe her with $2 million to steal a list. She pointed at him in the meeting room and mocked him. Girl helps girl. Understand? After Luis died, according to his will, all of his inheritance was left to me, and it was specifically stated to belong to me personally and not count as marital property. At his funeral, I saw Zoe one last time. She looked haggard, her back no longer straight. She muttered to herself, "So fate really can't be changed. This world is so unfair." Not long after, my assistant video called me from overseas, excitedly telling me she got straight A's in the course. Fate is so strange. Back then, I was just a front desk receptionist that nobody respected. How could I have imagined that today I could beat a bunch of foreigners? If I ever see Zoe again, I will tell her that fate can, of course, be changed. It's just that one must act without missing the right moment, and one must walk a bright path. Fate has its own rhythm and pulse. It cannot be rushed, cannot be mistaken, cannot be forced. Zoe and Luis's fates crossed. Most likely from that day they used the wrong teacups. She touched cups she should never have touched. He allowed it. After that, everything headed in the wrong direction, and there was no stopping it.